I always start like this with, okay, Robert Mallet-Stevens, born in 1886 and died in 1945. He could have lived a little bit longer, but he left something behind, although he didn't leave an archive because he ordered that upon his death, all his archive to be destroyed. And that's what happened. And because of it, apparently he fell in obscurity. But in 2005, there was a big exhibition, I think, at Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris. So there was a renewed interest in his works. In my opinion, he was a very special architect, and I don't know exactly why he ordered that his archive be destroyed. Fortunately, there are his buildings and also a number of drawings. He was also involved with film. Apparently, he was one of the few and first architects who showed an interest in film. He even did apparently the design of I didn't see the movie, it was called Inhumane, but apparently it is considered a masterpiece, and he did the stage design for that film. Also, an important surrealist photographer and filmmaker, Man Ray, made a film in one of his houses, which you are going to see. He was very involved with the artists, and he came from a family of collectors, and he had a good relationship with artists, craftsmen, and so on, filmmakers. So he assembled a team of other artists he worked with, and his buildings do have a very special sensitivity. This was the man, as you can see, quite elegant, and yes, an aristocrat and a man of high taste, and he designed some remarkable houses. So his name, Robert Mallet-Stevens. I don't know where the word Stevens comes from, which is not French, but he is French. He was French. He was born in France, and he's not an architect, as I said, who is very much talked about, but he should be talked about, and you'll understand why when we see villas that he built at the same time, almost identically at the same time with the Villa Savoy by Le Corbusier. And you'll see the difference. There is a difference, and I don't think he's inferior. So he was an influential French architect and designer. This is how he's described on the ubiquitous Wikipedia, which I think is a remarkable offering that the internet is sending us, this Wikipedia, because truly we have at our disposal, this incredible encyclopedia. Now, maybe sometimes not the information there is, very accurate, but all in all, it is a great tool to use, and is given to us for free. And so, there are good things happening in our world as well, and in our time. Anyway, you see, he was born actually yesterday on March 24th, but the website where I take my information from said March 25th. Anyway, some drawings by Robert Mallet-Stevens. Actually, I don't know how they pronounce in France Stevens. It sounds a little strange. It should be Stevens. Drawings, the architectural drawings. His architecture is kind of, it is a modernist architecture. It is a modern architecture, but with the touches of what might be called Art Deco, a little bit, but discreetly, and not always. We'll see. He has a very specific personal way of doing these perspectival drawings. Very simple, but peculiarly his. If you see a few drawings by him, you can always recognize him in a context with many other drawings by other people. now you see, he employs elements which are, you know, the orthodox modern architecture rejected, but he didn't. And actually, I am not so sure if he wasn't wise, in fact. Um, so we talked today, as I said, about two architects, a Frenchman and an Egyptian architect. And it's not very often that we talk about Egyptian architects, although they knew something about architecture, as you well know, in the past. But in the present, although they do have a few interesting architects, and even one of them, I don't know if you've heard of him, there are actually two brothers. One is a famous designer, and the other one is almost a famous architect. He teaches a studio in Vienna, in Austria, at the Institute of Architecture. I'm talking about Hani Rashid. Hani Rashid is running an architecture office called Asymptote with his wife. And I suggest to you, if you are interested, if we are talking about people who are in the forefront of architecture. So Hani Rashid, also Egyptian, but then he flew to Canada and from there to the States. He's now considered an American architect, but he's actually Egyptian. And his brother is a famous designer, also with the same name, Rashid. Anyway, back to the Frenchmen. We have more French architects that we talk about than Egyptians, but the Egyptians are worth considering as well, not just for the past, but also for the present, and also for the beautiful, though failed, Spring Revolution, because it was probably the most moving revolt of the masses, and the students were very involved in Tahrir, in the Tahrir Square. I forgot exactly when it was, in 2000s, maybe 2000s, I don't know, about 10 years ago or so, the Arab Spring. So the Egyptians are capable of still offering to the world inspiring, actions. But Robert mallet-stevens is himself provoking us with his drawings, and you'll see his buildings. His buildings are not radical, but they have a complexity that is truly worth contemplating. I would say a gentler modernity somehow, if I can call it so.
I have a question. Are the buildings that are drawn here actually exist, or are they just concept design?
No. Well, some of them, and you are going to see them, but others, no. From what I understood, he made some projects that remain at the level of projects for a cité ideal, or I don't know. They were gathered together in a kind of a urban project with proposals by him for various houses. This one, as far as I know, it was not built, and others as well. But he did build, and we are going to see them.
I ask this because they all kind of resemble a poster or something.
Of what?
A poster or poster.
Well, the graphics, the chosen graphics, yes. It was his way of, illustrating, rendering, if you want, the buildings he imagined. Now we are beginning to look at the works he built. This is from 1921, 1923, and it was completed in 1932. Villa Savoy by Le Corbusier was built in 1928. So around this time, I take this comparison because we all know Villa Savoy, but we don't know this building. And I don't think this building is to be neglected. I think it's a very interesting building, even with those two stairs and the large windows in the corner. And I think it's a remarkable building. And it has a complexity. You'll see also inside. This is not a building to ignore, but you know, it also depends. If he chose to have his archive destroyed, it's like he condemned himself to years of obscurity. But his work, I think, is not to be ignored. And it was not ignored during his time, but for a number of years after he died, yes, you see here the building was neglected, and then it was restored. And it is one of the important buildings of the modern movement. His architecture is interesting. We'll see some other things. And in Paris, he built 6 buildings on a street, a private, street, which is called actually with his name, Rue Mallet-Stevens. Now, how many people have in Paris a street with the name of the one who actually built 6 buildings on that street? And it's a very short street. It's not, a street with hundreds of buildings. No, it might be that he built all the buildings on that street. Maybe some prospective buyers here, I don't know, or architects. One thing is for sure, the building is not bad, but it was, you see, I don't know, this was during the construction, or I don't know what happened to it, but this is how it is now. And it is, sorry about this, the drawings are not very, the destiny of architecture is only in part dictated by man. Actually, there are many elements that affect a building, and not just nature. Wars, adversity, who knows, or people who want to change things around because they have different conceptions. I think this is a very fine building. It's monumental, but not in a crashing way, I would say. And with those 2 stairs outside with the big windows also in the corner, I think are impressive. And look at the interior. Nothing wrong with this interior, if you ask me. I mean, really, are the interiors at Villa Savoy better? I don't know. I'm not so sure. I had visited Villa Savoy, and now this is a very important building by him as well, Villa Noailles, from 1923, 1928. So again, contemporary. It was almost simultaneously built with Villa Savoy, and it's an architecture which is European, but has some elements of, if you look at this horizontality and the articulation of the volumes, you might think a little bit of Frank Lloyd Wright, but the roofs are terraced, so there are no sloping roofs. But there is some kind of a horizontal movement that makes me think a little bit of, or via the Netherlands architecture, which itself was influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright. So some kind of a connection there seems to be. It is a European building, but there is an organicity somehow that makes me think via Netherlands, Dudok, and others to Frank Lloyd Wright. Why is this architect less known? Well, I'm sure there are other architects who are less known, but they deserve to be known. although you saw on Wikipedia, it said an influential architect and designer, and he was during his lifetime, but he's maybe well known in France, but not so well known in, and maybe also Belgium, but not so well known in, let's say, in our country. Look at this strange swimming pool, indoor swimming pool. I mean, if you look at the ceiling, why did he make the ceiling like that? You know, it is surprising because the room is rectangular. And even, I don't know if this is what he proposed, but an interesting idea, you know, to have this, you know, object that children like so much, just about the water hanging from the ceiling. Again, I don't know if this was his, you know, idea, but what intrigues me is the ceiling, because the ceiling shows a nervousness almost. It's almost almost deconstruction somehow. It is horizontal, it is flat, but why he made the fragmentation of the ceiling in that way, I don't know. I don't know what happened here. It seems that you know, the swimming pool was emptied of water or something. But you can still see the room, and especially the ceiling, which is so unexpected. Other views of the interior are intriguing. You know, I don't know about this pink color, and I don't know if it belongs to him. By the way of pink, I don't know if you know, but the Falling Water building by Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous Falling Water, Casa de la Cascada, he initially wanted to paint the concrete parts of the building in gold, in some kind of a gold patina. And it was only the discretion of the client, Mr. Kaufman, that made him settle for a very pale pink. But initially, Frank Lloyd Wright wanted to use gold. Very strange in a way. And also in his own studio in Oak Park in Chicago, Frank Lloyd Wright also painted the walls of the receiving room where he received you know, visitors or possible clients. He painted the walls in also with a kind of a, you know, a shade of gold. And he was asked why he did that. And he said, because he wanted to give the impression to whoever visited his office. And he also lived in that building. It was his home and also his office, a larger building anyway. And he said he wanted to give the impression that he was doing very well, that, you know, if the walls were golden, of course he was doing very well. So sometimes architects, even the best of them, have peculiar, you know, they take peculiar decisions, and even the tastes seems to be sometimes a little bit extravagant, not to call it differently. Anyway. But then the ex-president of the United States, Mr. Trump, had all his apartment, you know, covered in gold. But he was not an architect, and thank God he didn't succeed in influencing the country, meaning the United States, to build so-called beautiful government buildings as he intended in the so-called classical style. This is what he wanted. Can you believe it? He wanted government buildings in the United States to be built in the beautiful so-called classical style. The words so-called are mine. Anyway, it is strange because, well, authoritarian figures in history, they like the so-called classical style. You know, even Stalin, for the palace of the Soviets, you know, he didn't choose the project of Le Corbusier and other modernistic projects. He chose, so-called in the name of the people, a building with columns, you know, white columns, Greek columns. classical, so-called classical. And it was supposed to be a socialist country, a communist country, the Soviet Union. Anyway, Villa Cavra in Croix, 1929-1932, by Robert Mallet-Stevens. Also an interesting building, really, by all means, is not a building to be ignored. And even the shadow in this interesting piece of water is engaging and interesting. And I like the building because it is both, I mean, it is asymmetrical. It is certainly, it has balance. It has an equilibrium. It has modernity, but also has a little bit of, I don't know, I certainly cannot say classicism, although it is a little bit ambiguous. And I like this ambiguity, you know, it's clearly a modern building, but it has something about it that and again, it is contemporary with Villa Savoy. And the articulation of the volumes it has vivacity. This is not an architect not to talk about, clearly. A skillful architect. Yes, he makes me think a little bit of Willem Dudok from the Netherlands. No one would say that this is not a modern building. Of course it is a modern building. Very much so. But look at this stair here with the entrance from underneath it. And there are, I almost said, delicious things here. It's a good building. Even inside has interesting features, you know, like this intimate place, you know, to watch the fireplace, you know, the fire, and you know, have a talk, and it's protected. It's like an alcove. It's interesting, I think, and sensitively done. So yes, it has elements of Art Deco. It does, but otherwise the building is very, you know, free of, you know, Art Deco details. Most of the time, the building is very so-called clean. It is an opulent villa. This is not a, you know, a little cottage for. No, it's an opulent villa with a large space around it. Strange that table there, you know, so narrow. I wonder if somehow it extends. It's possible, but I mean, considering it is for 4 people, you know, you barely can put the, you know, 2 plates on for both sides of the table, I think. Now we arrive at the Rue Mallet-Stevens that I told you about from 1927. So exactly around the time when Le Corbusier was building Villa Savoy, Mallet-Stevens was building 5 villas. In fact, I read 6. Anyway, 5 or 6 on Rue Mallet-Stevens. And obviously he was well connected if he had so many commissions all on the same street. Unfortunately for me, it was difficult to identify precisely these buildings. So I'll show a lot of pictures from that street, but it was with the exception of one building, Villa des Frères Martel, the villa of the brothers Martel, two sculptors. The others I couldn't identify exactly where they were, but we'll look at the street and all the buildings on that street. This is the street. It's a private street in Paris. And he built the buildings on this street. He built this building. And I don't know, I didn't count them. I should have looked on Google Maps to see how many buildings actually are on this street. I don't know if it's possible, but you see the street is not long. It's possible that all the buildings on this street were built by him. Kind of unique now to have a street with private villas, all built by the same architect in a city like Paris. The fact that he was involved also with film is also interesting. Now there are other architects involved with film, and there are architects like Bernard Tschumi who found inspiration in connecting with avant-garde film, so to speak, at the beginning of the 20th century. It's interesting to study the relationship between film and architecture. How would you, for example, edit a project inspired by the editing of a film? A question. Some say, like Vito Acconci, that architecture is not about space, but about time. And so is film, is about time. So it is interesting to reflect on the relationship between film and architecture. The relationship between music and architecture is more common and commented upon, and the phrase architecture is frozen music is well known. But between film and architecture is not so well known. And in a way, is the first, I don't know if architecture was the first art. It was considered the queen of the arts. Maybe the first art was dance. I don't know. But it was certainly at the very beginning architecture, while film is the seventh art. So you might approximate, you might say that we are dealing here with the first and the last, the first and the seventh art, which is film. He was involved with both. You see the name there, Rob Mallet-Stevens. So he designed these buildings on this street. Interesting detail here, makes me think a little bit of Brancusi. The similarity to some pedestals by Brancusi is striking. This is, I think, the building for the two sculptors. And we are going to see a few pictures from the inside. These are, you know, rather recent pictures on a sunny day in Paris. You see Rue Mallet-Stevens and architect, Voie Privée, a private street. Quiet street, maybe because it's private. Nice. Nice to live on such a street in Paris. Very nice. A privilege. Here are the brothers Martel, the sculpteurs, the sculptors. It's possible that not long after these pictures were taken, the rain started, because that's how it is in Paris. You know, the rain comes out of the blue sky for a few minutes and then it goes away and it's sunny again and again. The rain comes back unexpectedly. I know it happened to me several times, having no umbrella. Okay, moving forward. Some pictures of that time, late 20s, early 30s in Paris. And it seems somehow the modernism of the structures was even more striking then, for some reason. Maybe there was there was no vegetation, there were no trees, so the geometry of the buildings was more obvious. He built a lot. He was not so old when he died. I mean, Louis Kahn started essentially, or kind of, at 55. This man died at 59. Look at the car and look at the buildings. This is noticeable also in other photographs with buildings by Le Corbusier, where the car is obviously obsolete, old-fashioned, and the buildings are not. I guess this is at the opening of some of the buildings or the street. A lot of people here, as you can see. I guess the architect is this one here. Truly a quiet street. It's probably paradise on earth to be in Paris, living on such a street. Rob Mallet-Stevens, architect, 1927. Very narrow sidewalk, maybe to accommodate the green. Now, Villa des Frères Martel, the building of the Martel brothers, the sculptors. We are going to see also a few pictures from the inside of the building. And this was their studio. I imagine they are not alive any longer. The drawing that Mallet-Stevens did for this part of the building. There is another one on the left. Of that one, I'm not sure it was by him. Quite a spacious and luminous and studio, a very comfortable studio. Pardon? If I am to compare it with the building built by Le Corbusier, also in Paris, Maison aux Enfants, we could compare two artist studios, one built by Le Corbusier and one built by Mallet-Stevens. Unfortunately, I don't have here pictures with that building by Le Corbusier, but this is not bad. What artist would not have liked to have such a studio? I mean, even the terrace is interesting. Okay, now we look at, now I think I don't have pictures for this one. A garage Alfa Romeo, also in Paris, for a prestigious car maker, a modernistic building. There is another famous garage in Paris built by another famous architect, Perret, who built a very nice and well-known garage. Yes, a garage, if it's done built by a good architect like Auguste Perret, it makes it into the pages of the history of modern architecture. This is interesting here. Where there is invention, where there is creativity, then you get interesting things happening. The house of Louis Barrier Square, also in Paris. I don't think this is a house for anybody. You look at that huge window here as compared to this window. Art Deco, artworks incorporated into the building. Caserne de Pompiers, also, fire station from 1935. You see the drawing on the left and the building on the right. Nice cars. I mean, were they supposed to be for the firemen? I mean, look at the building. This is a building that even today you could build. And then look at the cars. I mean, the cars belong to another time. The building, could belong to our time quite well. But, these little luxurious, vehicles for the firemen, they make me smile. Anyway, yeah, we see the new one, the present with a different kind of vehicle. Immeuble de rapport de la rue Méchin, where Tamara de Lempica, I don't know who that person is, lived until the World War II. We are approaching the end of this introduction into the work of Robert mallet-stevens, but we recalled him, we remember him, and we wish him one day later happy birthday. This is an apartment building, maybe. Although there are interesting things here. You look at the vertical window, probably the staircase is here. It seems to have had or have stained glass windows. I couldn't find too many pictures for some of his works, but I think we have an idea now about Robert mallet-stevens. Okay, and now we go to a very different architect, the Egyptian Hassan Fathy, who was very different in many ways, and he truly deserves a lot of appreciation and attention. And I hope to be able to evoke why it is so. Born in 1900s in Alexandria in Egypt, and born in 1989. He was born one day before Robert mallet-stevens on March 23rd, was a noted Egyptian architect who pioneered appropriate technology for building in Egypt, especially by working to reestablish the use of adobe and traditional mud construction as opposed to Western building designs, material configurations, and layouts. Fathy was recognized with the Agar Chairman's Award for Architecture in 1980. In 2017, Google celebrated Fathy with a Google Doodle for pioneering new methods in architecture, respecting tradition, Egyptian heritage and tradition, and valuing all walks of life. He's known kind of the architect of the poor. Here we see the wording, an architecture for people. He was an aristocrat. He was born rich, but he understood that an architect should serve the people and should offer them, better conditions for life. And that's what he tried to do. I think he was a very interesting man, something in between an artist and a social worker. We are going to see his drawings and you realize he was an artist. He had an artistic sensibility. He was an architect, but he also had social concerns. And he probably hated injustice and the segregation and discrimination against the people who were less fortunate than he was. In other words, a compassionate intellectual, an artist. And we need more of them, I think. I mean, can you imagine Rem Koolhaas working, for the poorest poorest people of society? No way. No, it's a different kind of architect. Kolkhas works for Prada. Hassan Fathy worked for very, very poor villagers. And so, you know, straight is the line of duty and curved is the path of beauty. Interesting way to put it. Straight is the line of duty and curved is the path of beauty. I didn't know these words were his, but it seems they were indeed. Maybe you should think about this. You know, straight is the line of duty and curved is the path of beauty. Yes, a romantic, no, in a way. I mean, a man with idealism, and he was able to honor that idealism and express it. I'm a little bit disappointed of Stephen Hall. He talks about idealism and eloquently so, but when I invited him to judge the competition, A House for Ludwig van Beethoven last year, when there were 250 years from his birth, you know, his assistant asked me, what will the honorarium be, you know? What kind of idealism is that where you asked about the honorarium and you are not in need really at all? Anyway, Fathy has been called Egypt's best known architect since Imhotep. And I would underline the name Imhotep. At one time I was fascinated by Imhotep, the first architect in history. I even gave a lecture in New York at Storefront for Art and Architecture. It was in 1990, I think around 1993, 1990, I think around that time, 1993, 1995, and it was called Towards Imhotep, against and beyond the, yes, towards Imhotep, against and beyond deconstruction. And I invited famous architects in New York to attend. Most of them didn't come, but a few did come. And it was a very emotional evening for me. I took Imhotep as the symbol of a different kind of creator, not one who dismantles reality, as I thought the deconstructivists were doing, but my perceptions in time changed. An architect who built the first stone pyramid, you know, the stepped pyramid of Saqqara. Imhotep built it, and Imhotep was also a grand vizier, kind of a, you know, a doctor, a medicine man, you know, a shaman in a way of Pharaoh Zoser, and the only visual proof of his existence, besides his work and his legend, he was deified 250 years after his death. His name was to be discovered under the soul of King Zoser, you know, in a sculptured fragment. That's how the architect was. Even if it was an architect who was deified later on, was still under the foot of the pharaoh. Not very encouraging. Anyway. So here we have some drawings by Imhotep. No, sorry, not Imhotep, Hassan Fathy. I like these drawings very much. You know, they are, can you imagine doing, you students, projects like this, you know, in school with not scientific perspective, but frontal elevations and, you know, lyrical backgrounds in colors, and you'll see even animals on some renderings, like here, you know. And look how you know, I like this, you know, the way it is represented is certainly against the so-called realism of visualization. Look how these trees are drawn in, you know, and this is the plan. It is the elevation of the building, and then the plan courtyard or the space in front of the elevation, and the trees are not seen from the top, but projected on the plan. Nice, and you even have birds, and the trees are shown in this way. Why can't we, and here you have other kinds of birds, and why can't we draw like this, you know? Why? I'm a great adversary of the the dry effects of using the so-called correct scientific perspective, you know, because it leaves room, it leaves no room for much imagination. There is no room for poetry of interpretation. In the Middle Ages, there was no scientific perspective. So, you know, if you hated someone, even if that someone was near you in your rendering, you would make that someone very, very small. And if there was someone you loved or liked very much and was very far away, you would make that person very, very big. In other words, it was the psychological perspective, the soul perspective in a way, that mattered more than the physical one. We, in the name of objectivity, we impoverished even representations of architecture in a deadly way. This drawing by if we can call it drawing, this rendering by Hassan Fathy is more poetical and more so suggestive. It leaves room for the imagination. Yeah. And look here, you know, I mean, you know, probably this building didn't have this mountain behind, but for imagination, it works very well. And you have here the mythological animal in Egypt, and look how the trees are shown in plan. In plan, the trees are shown in elevation. Why not? This is my question. Why not? And look at these birds here, also in elevation, but here we have the plan. Very nice. And it can be done even in the present. And actually some people do it. It's just the morose, you know, so-called linear perspective that in the name of so-called controlling realistically and scientifically, you know, what we want to show, we tell the truth. It's not true. It's not true. I think this rendering has more truth in it than in our simplistic perspectives. Look here. Well, this is, I don't know, only now I notice that things are moving. It even shows, you know, how the flow of air. I think this is not the work of Hassan Fathy. Probably the drawing, I know it's not, because I see here kind of his portrait. It's an interpretation based on his drawings. But it does tell us something about the possibility of a different kind of rendering. A more imaginative one, a more inclusive one, a more holistic one, where you bring in animals and birds and people working the land and the portrait of the architect. Why shouldn't the students, meaning you who are here now, also draw on your plan a self-portrait on, you know, on your project, a self-portrait, or maybe, I don't know, show some scenes from your life, or the lives of the people who live in the building, and, you know, just be creative and narrate something. You know, we lost the pleasure of invention, really. It's very depressing, in my opinion. And again, I like very much this fact that he shows that the trees, you know, projected on the earth, because the objective one would draw them seen from above. But why can't you simultaneously see both ways? Look here also, you know, I mean, this is more realistic in a way, but it's still, it is still an animated drawing. So one of his first assignments after graduating in 1926 from what is now the University of Cairo was to build a school at Talca, a small town along the Nile in northern Egypt. The absolute squalor of the place haunted Fathy. The streets were littered with rotten food and filthy water. The buildings were dilapidated, and the peasants who lived there had accepted their depressing lot. This experience inspired him to improve the lives of those who were powerless to do so without help. Fair School, it was that school that I talked about, I read about before. And I think the architecture is fine. You know, yes, it's not very well kept. Yes, there are no so-called details, but he was a master of understanding the traditional materials and working with them honestly. So Hassan Fathy was a cosmopolitan, trilingual professor, engineer, architect, amateur musician, dramatist, and inventor. He designed nearly 160 separate projects, from modest country retreats to fully planned communities with police, fire, and medical services, markets, schools, theaters, and places for worship and recreation. These communities included many functional buildings such as laundry facilities, ovens, and wells. He utilized ancient design methods and materials, as well as knowledge of the rural Egyptian economic situation, with a wide knowledge of ancient architectural and town design techniques. He trained local inhabitants to make their own materials and build their own buildings. Fathy gained international critical acclaim for his involvement in the construction of New Gurna, located on Luxor's west bank, built to resettle the village of Gurna, which fell within the archaeological areas of the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. Fathy's plan devised groundbreaking approaches to economic, social, and aesthetic issues that typically impact the construction of low-cost housing. With regard to the economic issues, Fathy noted that structural steel was not an apt choice for a poor country, and that even materials such as cement, timber, and glass did not make good economic sense. To address this issue, Fathy instead devised a plan that included the use of appropriate technology, notably mud brick construction. Noting that the traditional village, although afflicted with issues of overcrowding and poor sanitation, was also an expression of a living society in all its complexity, Fathy strived to design New Gurna in a manner that addressed the social concerns, including attempting to consult directly with every family in Gurna and advocating for the involvement of social ethnographers in the planning process. Despite this, inhabitants of the former village were not enthusiastic about relocating, which effectively cut them off from their existing livelihood of trading in archaeological finds. With regard to aesthetic issues, Fathy placed emphasis on traditional Nubian architectural designs, which he observed in a 1941 trip to the region: enclosed courtyards, vaulted roofing, yielding what Fathy described as spacious, lovely, clean, and harmonious houses. He also made use of traditional Nubian ornamental techniques, claustra, a form of mud lattice work, as well as vernacular architecture techniques of the Gurna region. Some critics have observed, however, that Fathy's project for Gurna is not a superlative example of how to prioritize vernacular architecture in an urban plan, given that the domed architecture Fathy championed is traditionally used for funerary architecture rather than residential or domestic spaces. I don't know about these critics. Now we'll look at some buildings, and I think This is architecture with a capital A. This is not, and I read that until a certain number of years ago, he was considered kind of a postmodern, but later it was increasingly understood that he was actually advocating a different kind of modernity, a different kind of modern architecture. And I think this interpretation is correct. Yes, his architecture is derived from the vernacular architecture, but I think he goes beyond nostalgia. And there is a vivacity in his work, which is more modern through and through, although he's anchored in the vernacular traditions of his country. Uh, Now here, maybe, yes, you might say there is a little bit of the postmodern sweetness, maybe a little bit, but other buildings by him have even an austerity that is quite strikingly modern, and we are going to see it. It's an unadorned architecture. So he built this village that was inspired by the local traditions. Mud architecture, but you can build beautifully with mud if you understood the construction techniques as he understood them. And look here, you know, what is wrong with this architecture? In my opinion, nothing. It's interesting, it's even sculptural. Also, although he built a few private buildings, it's obvious this was a man with social concerns. By the way, we know about the Pritzker Prize, but there is a very important prize in the Islamic world, in the Muslim world, the Aga Khan Prize, and he got it. And I make this suggestion to you to look at the works that were awarded this prize. There are excellent works, really. It's a very, very important prize in architecture, the Aga Khan Prize. Now, who would say that this is not modern architecture? I think it is. Again, a bird, you know, why can't we actually use a suggestion from Hassan Fathy and represent north, because maybe that's what is supposed to show this, as a bird? Maybe the presence of a bird on a drawing would add something that today is missing, maybe. Fathy designed the mosque and madrasa constructed with adobe at Dar el Islam, an educational center near this place, Abiquiu, in New Mexico, USA, New Mexico, USA. So he built also in the United States. The main buildings were completed in 1981. You remember he died in 1989, and Dar el Islam opened in 1982. You are going to see some images. So he built in the United States, but not in a very different way than the buildings he built in Egypt. Now, in the dialectics between tradition and innovation, at the first sight, you might say there is more tradition here than innovation. But I don't know. I mean, it is possible that he used innovation in a subtle way. And unless I know sufficiently well how the buildings came into being and the intricacies of, the construction and the intricacies of the tradition, maybe I cannot truly say if it is so, if indeed there is more tradition than innovation. But he was a creative architect. He was not just employing old techniques without, his participation of his own time. So this is in the United States. Um, we are we are going to see now other buildings in Egypt. This is a house he built in Luxor. It's a private, opulent house. We are going to see also his own house. I think there is nobility here in these buildings. The plan and studies for the plan. I think rurality brought to a building could be very beneficial. If somehow we can create a residential architecture which is, even if it is not placed in a village, but has something of the simplicity of the rural architecture. Of course, here the architecture is peculiarly Egyptian, but I think in other cultures as well. I think we kind of forgot too much the village. And Rem Koolhaas, with his astuteness, he understood that we should reconsider our relationship with the rural, with the rurality, with the village. He doesn't really do it himself, but as a provocateur, I think he's right. Hassan Fathy is the Middle East's father of sustainable architecture. This is what I read about him, and it's probably true. Now, another house in Egypt. I don't think I have more than these drawings. I couldn't find pictures of it. No, I do. I think it's another one where I only found a drawing or two drawings. He also wrote a book, Building for the Poor, and that book can be found, can be purchased, and I think it has a subject which is important, I think, because carried away by the demands of capitalism, we forget often about the poor. How do you build for the poor instead of for corporations or people who made the new rich? How do you build for the poor? At the beginning of the 20th century, modern architects did have social concerns, many of them. But these days, I don't know. I look at the buildings built in Singapore, the Switzerland of the Southeast Asia by UN Studio, and there is no concern at all for those people sleeping in the shadow of the big trees. Now this is the second, so we saw already the new Gurma and Gurna, and now we see another village he built, the new Baris village in Karga in Egypt, 20 years after the one that we already saw. No other project dominates this mature phase of the architect's work as much as the village of New Baris, in a way that is comparable to the notoriety of New Gurna 20 years before. This remote and forbidding wilderness outpost designed by him, which is almost in the geographical center of Egypt, was planned to initially house 250 families, of which more than half were intended to be farmers and the remainder to be service personnel. His previous experience with such a project, and particularly his ability to build it inexpensively, made Fathy the logical choice as the architect for New Baris. And I think it's great architecture. It's very austere, and you know, it's a sober architecture. It's rhythmical, it's structural, it's a powerful architecture. It's a citadel, no? It's almost like a fortress in a way, in the center of Egypt. Structure by itself could be beautiful as well if it is done as Hassan Fathy did it. From what I understood, his buildings were very concerned with, you know, the flow of air, with the, you know, providing a comfortable environment without the need for ventilators and certainly no air conditioners in a very warm climate. Now look at this. This is major architecture, and who would say it's not modern? At the same time, connected with the traditions of the place. Now, a residence in Cairo, I would say, you know, outside of Cairo. Cairo is a very big city, but this building doesn't seem to have a lot of other buildings around it. It's not such a small building as it might look from, you will see it from a different angle, and it's a good building. An apartment. From what I understood, he left Egypt for a number of years. He went to the United States, to Jordan, to various places. When he came back, he got this small job, so-called small, to you know, design an apartment in Cairo. But he was able to create a very rich environment within a, you know, just an apartment. So, you know, those who try to say that the architect does the building and the interior designer does the interior design, is not quite like this. An architect does both. And in as much as an architect can do interior design, those who study interior architecture can also design buildings. This is my opinion. They are all architects. And in fact, in the School of Architecture here, those who teach at the Faculty of the Interior are architects. That's exactly what they are. They are not interior designers, they are architects. Not to speak about the fact, as Le Corbusier said, and also Wright, and in general, the modernist movement, and maybe not just the modernist movement, always stated very clearly a building should be conceived from the inside out. So you begin with the interior, from the interior towards the exterior. So what do you do with an architect who actually doesn't so-called study how to do interior architecture? Here we have Hassan Fathy, obviously an architect, doing interior architecture, and he does it very well, with a lot of sensibility and affection. It looks like a very pleasant interior, in my opinion. Who wouldn't love to live in such a place? I would. Lots of textiles and pillows, and it's a different kind of life, but it seems to me very, very sensitive and comfortable, warm. So this is the most important Egyptian architect after Imhotep, as he was described. I wonder if Imhotep designed interiors. A ceramics factory in this place, Kina in Egypt. A second community-oriented project that followed New Gurna. This time was a Jesuit-based crafts center located at Garagos, which was intended to improve the standard of living of the people in the village there. The plan for a ceramics factory, while deceptively low-tech in appearance, represents an extremely logical and efficient production diagram for the manufacture of pottery. So the methods of construction actually were intimately connected with the conception of the building, of the architecture that Hassan Fathy did. He didn't just draw lines and then thought about how to build a building. No, I think he started, in fact, with a very accurate knowledge about the methods of construction and the materials he was intending to use. He didn't use concrete, he didn't use steel, he didn't use glass, he used the materials of traditional architecture, and he built, significantly and convincingly. A house in Jordan, I don't know if I have pictures of it now. This house is an unusually fine example of Hassan Fathy. I know, but I couldn't find pictures. Consistent care for residential space used for hospitality. The outside area enclosed by arcades is primarily given over to this function and balances well with the more private character of the interior. I just thought of it that actually I think architecture achieves what it's supposed to achieve when it balances between the public dimension and the private dimension. And this is probably true. It almost doesn't matter what kind of building. It could be a private residence. If you can bring an intimacy to a public building, that is a good thing. And if you can bring some kind of a publicness to a private building, that's a good thing also, I think. Yeah, I found this website, which shows 15 projects by Hassan Fathy, and I took some of them from there in the following pages, so to speak. The Fathy house in Sidi Krier in Egypt is in the house designed for himself in Egypt. This is his own house. The use of typologies and traditional forms is combined with influences from other cultures, transforming them in his style. Well, because he also lived in other countries. The design of the house has noble sobriety, and the human size and all the pieces have been designed according to a symphony of forms and ideas, but also moods and materials. Fathy wanted the house to be a successful prototype of a low-cost structure, all beautiful, but also a model for tourist units. I don't know about that, what means a model, model for tourist units. But here I see kind of a austere oasis without green for a man with intellectual concerns, for a thinker, for an artist, for a humanist, for a social worker, with a sea not far away, but probably with a city far away. His own house, Hassan Fathy's house. It would be interesting to compare this house with, let's say, Taliesin East or West by Frank Lloyd Wright, because it would be difficult to compare it with Le Cabanon by Le Corbusier. This is still a house with several rooms and courtyards and spaces. It has a certain complexity and certain dimensions. To be honest with you, I like it more than the vacation house by Valerio Olgiati in Portugal. This house is not, some kind of, idiosyncratic statement of an architect. No, he is an architect who respects the traditions of his country, of the place where he built, although he's a sophisticated architect and a well-traveled and well-cultured architect, but with a deep understanding for the fact that we just ended our presentation on Hassan Fathy. Thank you.